I never meant for it to get this far. It started as a simple lie, one that I thought would be harmless, a necessary omission to keep the life I had carefully constructed from crumbling. But lies have a way of twisting into something bigger, something uncontrollable, and before I knew it I was living two lives. My name is Vanessa, and for the past 5 years, I've been balancing a secret I never thought would catch up with me. I have 2 husbands, 2 homes, 2 families. I never wanted to hurt Jacob. He was good to me, steady and reliable, the kind of man a woman should want. We had been together for nearly a decade, married for 7 years, and for the most part our life was good. Comfortable. He worked hard, loved me fiercely, and never asked for more than I was willing to give. But there was always something missing. A spark. A thrill that I had long convinced myself I could live without. And then there was Daniel. Daniel was the past I never fully let go of. My first love, the man who made my heart race in ways Jacob never did. We were together before I met Jacob, but things were complicated back then. Daniel and I had a whirlwind romance that burned hot and fast, but it ended in disaster. When I met Jacob, he was everything Daniel wasn't: stable, patient, dependable. I convinced myself that was what I needed, that passion was overrated, that love was a choice rather than a feeling. But Daniel never truly left my life. I told Jacob that Daniel was a mistake of my youth. A reckless chapter 1 had closed long ago. The truth? I never really left Daniel. Not in my heart. Not even after I married Jacob. And now I had woven myself into an impossible situation. This year, Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. Jacob had wanted to host dinner at our house, something intimate, just the 2 of us. He thought it would be nice. A break from the chaos of family gatherings, he called it. But I had other plans. I told him work needed me, that my boss had scheduled an emergency meeting in the afternoon, and I had to be there. That I would make it up to him later. He believed me, of course he did. Jacob was trusting to a fault. The truth? I was spending Thanksgiving with Daniel. Every year I told myself it would be the last. Every year I promised I would end things, that I would choose one life and let the other go. But every year, I found myself back at Daniel's house, slipping effortlessly into the warmth of the life I had with him. Because, with Daniel, I wasn't just Vanessa, the responsible wife of a dedicated husband. With Daniel I was free. His house was already alive with the smell of roasted turkey and fresh bread when I arrived. The moment I stepped inside, I was home. His children, our children, ran to greet me, arms wrapping around me in a way that made my heart twist. Mommy's here. God, I hated the way that word made me feel. Daniel's arms slid around my waist, his lips pressing a warm kiss to my temple. I was starting to think you wouldn't make it, he murmured against my skin. I forced a smile, pushing aside the guilt that always gnawed at the edges of moments like this. You know I wouldn't miss it. Because, as much as I tried to deny it, this was the life I wanted. I sat at the beautifully decorated dining table, surrounded by people who loved me, and for a moment, I let myself believe it could last forever. That I could continue to live in both worlds without consequence. That I could keep Jacob in his quiet, predictable existence while also keeping the fire and passion Daniel gave me. But nothing lasts forever. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I barely glanced at it. I had turned off notifications for Jacob's messages, just for the evening, just so I wouldn't feel guilty. But this time it wasn't a text. It was a call. From him. I felt the shift in the air before I even answered. Daniel had noticed. He always noticed. His gaze was sharp, unreadable. Work? He asked, voice laced with skepticism. I nodded, forcing a small laugh. They never leave me alone, even on holidays. He watched me, and for a brief moment I wondered if he knew. If he had always known. I silenced the call without answering. It didn't matter what Jacob wanted. I wasn't his tonight. But I had no idea what was coming. Because while I was laughing at the dinner table with my real family, Jacob was learning the truth. And he was about to make sure I never forgot it. The warmth of Daniel's house wrapped around me like a cocoon, a safe haven from the life I had left behind for the night. The laughter of our children, the clinking of wine glasses, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. This was what Thanksgiving was supposed to feel like. I let myself believe for just a few hours that I was exactly where I belonged. But deep down I knew better. Guilt was a constant companion in my double life, a shadow that never left my side. No matter how many times I convinced myself I deserved happiness in both of my worlds, I couldn't silence the small voice in my head whispering that this wouldn't last. That one day, everything I had so carefully built would come crashing down around me. I just never thought it would be today. My phone buzzed again. I hesitated this time. The first call I had ignored. A second? That meant something was wrong. I pulled the phone from my pocket, keeping it low so Daniel wouldn't see. Jacob. Again. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I should answer. I should at least pretend to care. But the moment I stepped away from the table, Daniel's voice stopped me. Who keeps calling? His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. Just work. I lied effortlessly, slipping my phone back into my pocket. They always find some excuse to bother me. He didn't say anything, just studied me in that quiet way he always did when he suspected something. Come on, I said quickly, reaching for his hand. Let's enjoy tonight, just us. His suspicion faded, a slow smile pulling at his lips as he squeezed my hand. You're right. You're here. That's all that matters. And for the next 20 minutes I let myself believe that was true. Until the knock on the door came. Daniel's brother, Chris, got up to answer it. The rest of us barely noticed. We were too wrapped up in our meal, in our laughter, in the illusion of normalcy. But then he called out, his voice tight with confusion. Daniel? I think you need to come see this. The room stilled. Daniel glanced at me before pushing back his chair. I followed him, an uneasy feeling blooming in my stomach as we walked toward the front door. The moment I saw him, the world tilted. Jacob stood on the front porch, dressed in the same navy sweater he had put on this morning when he kissed me goodbye, his eyes dark and unreadable. He wasn't alone. In his hands he held a thick manila envelope, and behind him, a private investigator. The moment my mind caught up with what was happening, my breath hitched. He knew. Jacob's gaze didn't leave mine as he stepped over the threshold, his voice eerily calm. Happy Thanksgiving, Vanessa. No one spoke. The silence in the house was deafening. Daniel stiffened beside me, his protective instincts kicking in. Who the hell are you? Jacob didn't even acknowledge him. His attention was fixed on me, as if he were daring me to deny it, to make up one last lie. Vanessa, he said again, this time softer. Do you want to introduce me to your real family? I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Daniel looked at me, his confusion turning to something sharper. Vanessa, what is he talking about? I opened my mouth, but before I could even begin to form an excuse, Jacob answered for me. She's my wife. The words hit like a bomb. Daniel's entire body went rigid. The room spun, the walls closing in, and I felt a crushing weight settle on my chest. I turned to Daniel, my voice barely above a whisper. I can explain. Jacob didn't let me. He held up the envelope in his hand, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Save it, he said coldly. Because I didn't come here for an explanation. He stepped forward, shoving the envelope into my trembling hands. I came to serve you these. My fingers fumbled as I looked down, my vision blurring as I took in the bold words printed across the front. Divorce papers. I gasped. Jacob leaned in, lowering his voice so only I could hear. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I would spend Thanksgiving alone while you played house with him? Tears burned the back of my eyes. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But Jacob wasn't finished. He turned to Daniel. I don't know what she told you, but Vanessa is my wife. And she's been lying to both of us. The color drained from Daniel's face. I had never seen him look so betrayed. For the first time since Jacob arrived, my two worlds were colliding. And there was no escaping the wreckage. I reached for Daniel, but he recoiled like I had burned him. Daniel, please. You told me your husband was dead. His voice was raw, shaking with fury. You looked me in the eye and told me he was gone. The room swayed. I felt sick. Jacob let out a hollow laugh. Oh, that's rich. So I was dead? Wow, Vanessa. I almost have to admire your creativity. I turned back to Jacob, desperation clawing at my throat. Jacob, please just... No. He cut me off, stepping back toward the door. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want an apology. I just wanted you to see what it feels like to have everything ripped away from you. He turned his back on me, heading toward the exit. "You've got 30 days to sign those," he said over his shoulder. "After that we're done. Forever." The door slammed behind him. And just like that, my carefully built world shattered into pieces. The sound of the door slamming behind Jacob echoed through the house, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. The weight of the divorce papers in my hands felt unbearable. I wanted to scream, to run after him, to tell him that this wasn't how it was supposed to happen. But no words came. I could feel the eyes on me, burning with confusion, anger and disbelief. "Vanessa." Daniel's voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. "Tell me he's lying." My mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You told me your husband was dead," he repeated, his voice rising. "You let our children believe he was dead." The living room was spinning, the walls closing in around me. I had never seen Daniel like this. His face was contorted with something raw, something broken. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. I had no idea what to say. Because Jacob hadn't lied. I had told Daniel that my husband was dead. It was the only way to keep this life intact. If he had known the truth, if he had known I had left another man to come back to him, it would have changed everything. So I had buried the past. And now it had come back to bury me. Daniel stepped back, running a hand through his hair, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. His brother Chris was the first to speak. "So what? You just married 2 men and thought no one would ever find out." His disgust was palpable. "Jesus, Vanessa, what the hell is wrong with you?" My stomach twisted. My children, our children, were watching all of this unfold with wide, confused eyes. I hadn't even thought about what this would mean for them. "Mom." Ella, our youngest, looked up at me, her voice hesitant. "What's happening?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, kneeling to her level. "Sweetheart, it's complicated." Daniel's face twisted with rage. "No, don't you dare lie to her again." I flinched. "Did you ever love me?" he asked suddenly. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was quiet. "Hollow." I met his gaze, my vision blurring with tears. "Daniel, of course He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "No. I don't think you did." "Daniel, please." I reached for him, but he stepped back. "Don't touch me." The rejection stung like a slap. Chris scoffed. "God, I can't believe I ever let you near our family. You played all of us like we were idiots." Ella whimpered, burying her face in her older brother's shoulder. I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to explain, but I knew it was too late. "You need to leave," Daniel said. I froze. "What?" "Get out of my house." My heart clenched. "Daniel, I live here." "Not anymore." I looked around the house, the home I had built with him, the life I had carefully crafted. This was supposed to be my happy ending. I had spent years making sure I had the perfect family, the perfect escape from my dull life with Jacob. And in one night I had lost it all. I drove aimlessly through the dark streets, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Where was I supposed to go? I couldn't go back to Daniel's. That much was clear. He didn't just want me out, he wanted me erased. And the way he had looked at me, he hated me now. I had nowhere else to turn. Except Jacob. The thought made my stomach churn. After what had just happened, after the way he had humiliated me in front of everyone, he would never take me back. But I had no other choice. So I drove toward the home we had shared, my mind racing. Maybe if I could just get him to listen, I could fix this. I parked in the driveway, the sight of the house making my chest tighten. The front light was on, a soft glow illuminating the porch. I hesitated before stepping out, my heart pounding. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door swung open. Jacob stood in the doorway, looking exhausted. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw clenched. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at me, waiting. I swallowed, my voice shaky. "Jacob, please. Just let me explain." He let out a slow breath. "Explain what, Vanessa?" I opened my mouth, but he shook his head. "No. Actually, I don't want to hear it." His voice was like ice. "You're only here because you have nowhere else to go. And that's not my problem anymore." My stomach dropped. "Jacob, please." "You're not coming inside," he cut me off. Whatever you thought you could say to fix this. It's too late. He started to close the door. Panic surged through me. I reached out, grabbing the door frame. Jacob, please. I have nowhere else to go. For a moment he hesitated. Then, with a final emotionless look, he pulled my fingers from the door frame and slammed the door in my face. The cold night air bit at my skin as I stood frozen on Jacob's front porch, my fingers still curled around empty space where the door had just been. He had shut me out. Really shut me out. I blinked, willing my mind to catch up. This wasn't supposed to happen. I had always assumed that if things ever went sideways I would still have some control. That Jacob, despite everything, would still be Jacob, predictable, steady, safe. But this Jacob? The one who had humiliated me in front of Daniel and my children? The one who had just slammed the door in my face? I didn't know him. I raised my hand to knock again, but I stopped myself. What was I even going to say? That I was sorry? That I had reasons? That I never meant to hurt him? All of it sounded hollow. I took a step back, my body trembling, not just from the cold but from the weight of what I had done. My entire life was unraveling, and for the first time I had nowhere to run. I turned and walked back to my car, slipping inside and shutting the door. The silence was deafening. I had lost everything. Daniel. My children. My home. And now Jacob. I let my forehead drop against the steering wheel as a sob tore its way out of me. Where do I go now? I reached for my phone. The battery was nearly dead. The screen dim as I scrolled through my contacts. My mother? No, she would demand explanations. She would shame me, remind me, like she always did, that I was never enough for a good man like Jacob. A friend? No, I had none close enough to call in the middle of the night. Not for this. Daniel? I nearly laughed at my own stupidity. The man who had just thrown me out of his house would never let me back in. I had no one. I stared at Jacob's house through the windshield, the warm glow of the porch light mocking me. If I had just stayed here, if I had just chosen him, none of this would be happening. But I had wanted more. I had wanted Daniel. Now I had neither. My hands tightened around my phone, and before I could talk myself out of it, I did the only thing I could. I called a hotel. The motel smelled like bleach and regret. I dropped my bag onto the stiff bed, staring at the faded wallpaper, the tiny television mounted to the wall. This was where I had ended up. Not in Daniel's warm home. Not in the house I had built with Jacob. But here. Alone. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as I unlocked my phone. Maybe if I just texted Jacob he would listen. Maybe he would let me come back, just for one night. But before I could type a word, a notification flashed on my screen. Bank account alert. $5,000 withdrawal, joint checking. My stomach twisted. I quickly clicked on the notification, scanning the details. Jacob. He had drained our joint account. My breath hitched. I checked the savings next. Gone. The credit card? Frozen. I nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't just anger. This wasn't just payback. Jacob was cutting me off completely. Panic surged through me. I tried calling him. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I let out a shaky breath, gripping the phone like it was my last tether to the life I had lost. Jacob, please. I whispered into the empty room. I had thought the divorce papers were the worst thing he could do to me. I had been wrong. The next morning I woke up to the harsh reality of my new life. I had no home. No money. No access to anything. Jacob had frozen me out in every possible way. I tried to tell myself that this was temporary, that he would cool down, that I could fix things. But as I sat in that tiny motel room, staring at the nothingness I had left, I realized something terrifying. For the first time in my life I was truly alone, and I had no idea what to do next. I sat in that cheap motel room long after the morning sun crept through the dusty blinds, staring blankly at the cracked ceiling. My mind was a battlefield of emotions, anger, shame, regret. But above all there was one feeling I couldn't escape. Panic. I was trapped. No home. No money. No one to turn to. I checked my bank app again, hoping, praying that I had imagined it. Balance $0. Jacob had drained everything. The accounts, the savings, the emergency fund. The credit cards were frozen. I clenched the phone in my hand, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't just punishment, this was war. Jacob wasn't just walking away. He was making sure I had nothing to walk away with. My phone buzzed and I nearly dropped it in my rush to check. Maybe Jacob had relented. Maybe there was a message, a sign of weakness, a sliver of hope. Unknown number. Your check-in ends at noon. Additional nights must be paid up front. I shut my eyes. Of course. I had no money. I had no way to stay here. I had nowhere to go. I had spent the past decade carefully weaving two lives together, keeping both men where I needed them, ensuring I was always in control. Now, both of them had shut the door in my face. But I still had one option left. I pressed the call button. It rang. Once. Twice. Then. Vanessa. Daniel's voice sent a jolt of desperation through me. I sat up straight. Daniel, please. Why are you calling me? After everything? After last night. His voice was thick with resentment. I forced down the lump in my throat. I don't have anywhere else to go. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. You think I care? Daniel, please, I whispered. I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. But I don't have anything left. I just need a place to stay. Just for a few days. You're unbelievable. I flinched. You lied to me for years, Vanessa. You let me believe you were a widow. You let our kids, think their mother was this faithful, devoted woman, while you were running off to another man's bed. And now what? You expect me to just take you back because things didn't go your way. I have nowhere else to go, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. For a long time there was nothing but silence. Then he spoke, voice ice cold. Not my problem. Click. The call ended. I let out a shaky breath, lowering the phone onto the mattress. That was it. The last lifeline was gone. I was truly alone. I left the motel at exactly 11:58 a.m., walking past the front desk clerk with my head down. I had nowhere to go, but I refused to let them see me break. The November air was biting, cutting straight through my thin sweater. I got in my car, one of the only things Jacob hadn't taken from me yet, and sat motionless, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I should have planned for this. I should have known that one day, the weight of my choices would come crashing down. I had spent years balancing two lives, two families, always confident that I could keep it together. Now I had neither. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes hollow. For years I had lived in control. I had been the one pulling the strings. Now I was nothing more than a woman sitting in a freezing car with nowhere to go. No family. No husband. No home. For hours I drove aimlessly, my stomach twisted with hunger, my body aching from exhaustion. But I kept driving, hoping that somehow, somewhere, I'd figure out my next move. And then before I even realized what I was doing, I found myself pulling into a familiar driveway. The house was smaller than I remembered, nestled in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. A single porch light flickered against the gray afternoon sky. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my heart hammering. I didn't want to do this. I had sworn I never would. But I was out of options. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, walked up the short pathway, and knocked on the door. Seconds passed. Then, the door creaked open, and there she was. My mother. Her face hardened the moment she saw me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Well, she said, arms crossed. Look who finally came crawling back. I swallowed hard. Mom, I whispered. I need help. She let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. I bet you do. She didn't move. She didn't step aside. She was waiting. For an explanation. For an apology. For something. I clenched my fists at my sides, my pride warring with my desperation. I had spent years keeping my distance from this house. I had sworn I'd never return, that I didn't need her. But right now, she was the last door left to knock on. And I had no choice but to walk through. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't move, didn't invite me inside, didn't offer so much as a flicker of warmth. I had expected this. I had always known that if I ever came crawling back to her, this would be the welcome I'd receive. Still, standing here now, stripped of everything, the weight of her cold stare was unbearable. You look awful, she finally said, tilting her head slightly. Did he finally leave you? I swallowed. Can I come in? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied me like I was a stranger, like I was someone she barely recognized. And maybe to her I was. Why are you here, Vanessa? I should have been ready for the question, but I wasn't. My throat felt tight, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. I need help, I admitted. A slow, humorless smile stretched across her lips. Help? She repeated. Oh, sweetheart. You made it very clear a long time ago that you didn't need me. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to fight with her. Not now. Mom, please. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed heavily and stepped aside. Fine, she muttered. Come in before the neighbors start staring. I didn't hesitate. The house smelled the same, faintly of lavender and old wood. Everything was painfully familiar, yet suffocating. It wasn't a home. Not really. Not to me. I had left this place the moment I turned 18, vowing never to return. My mother and I had never been close. She had raised me with sharp words and even sharper expectations, always reminding me that love was conditional, that I was only worth what I could offer someone. Maybe that's why I had spent my entire adult life making sure I was needed by two men. Maybe that's why I had convinced myself that as long as I played my role well enough, I would never be left behind. And now here I was, with nothing. I stood awkwardly in the living room, unsure of what to do with myself. Well, my mother arched an eyebrow. Are you going to tell me what happened? Or are we just going to stand here in silence? I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. Jacob found out. Her expression didn't change. She didn't gasp, didn't react with shock or anger. Instead, she simply gave a slow nod. Of course he did, she said matter-of-factly. I blinked. What? She sighed, walking to the kitchen and pouring herself a cup of tea. Vanessa, you're good at lying. You always have been. But lies don't last forever. You were bound to slip up eventually. I clenched my fists. I didn't slip up. That made her laugh. A short, dry chuckle as she leaned against the counter, watching me over the rim of her teacup. Oh, so he's just a genius now, she mused. What happened? He hires someone to follow you. I hesitated. Her smirk deepened. Ah, she said. So he did. And let me guess, he made a scene? Humiliated you? Took everything. My silence was answer enough. She shook her head. I raised you better than this. If you were going to cheat, you should have covered your tracks better. Anger flared in my chest. I didn't come here for a lecture, Mom. Then why did you come here, Vanessa? She shot back, setting down her cup with a sharp clink. Because I don't think you came to apologize. I don't think you suddenly realized you've been a terrible wife and mother. No, you came here because you're desperate. Because you have nowhere else to go. Her words cut deep. Because they were true. I just need a place to stay for a few days, I said, keeping my voice even. She stared at me for a long moment before sighing dramatically. Fine. You can stay in the guest room. But don't think for a second that this is permanent. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Rent is $300 a week, she added. I froze. What? You heard me, she said, sipping her tea. I'm not running a charity, Vanessa. You want a roof over your head? You pay for it. I let out a bitter laugh. Mom, I have nothing. Jacob cleaned out our accounts. My cards are frozen. She shrugged. Not my problem. My stomach twisted with anger and humiliation. So what? You're just going to let me live on the street? She raised an eyebrow. Did I not just offer you a room? I didn't say you couldn't stay. I said you have to pay for it. Welcome to the real world, sweetheart. I clenched my teeth, swallowing my pride. I'll get you the money. Good. She picked up her tea and walked past me toward the hallway. Dinner's at 6. Don't expect me to cook for you. And just like that, I was dismissed. I stared after her, a bitter taste in my mouth. This wasn't home. This wasn't safety. This was just another prison. But right now it was the only option I had. I sat on the edge of the bed in the small guest room, staring at my phone. I had to figure something out. I needed money. Fast. My job? That was gone. I had barely worked in the past year. Jacob had supported me, and Daniel had filled in the rest. My savings? Wiped out. The only thing I had left was my car. I exhaled slowly, opening a search engine on my phone. Best way to sell a car quickly for cash. Listings popped up. Used dealerships, private buyers, sketchy offers. I didn't have time to be picky. I could sell the car, get enough to stay here for a few weeks, and figure out my next move. I clenched my jaw. I had spent years believing I would always have control, that no matter what I could fix things. But now I was nothing more than a woman with a fast dwindling list of options. And the clock was ticking. The next morning, I woke up to the unfamiliar sounds of my childhood home, the creak of my mother's footsteps in the kitchen, the faint hum of the old refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Felt suffocating. I had spent my entire adult life running from this place, vowing I'd never return. And yet here I was trapped. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples as I checked my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Daniel still wasn't speaking to me. Jacob hadn't unblocked me. And my children. I swallowed the lump in my throat. They were probably still trying to understand what had happened, still trying to process why their mother had been thrown out like some stranger. Would they ever forgive me? Would anyone? I exhaled shakily, pushing away the thought. I didn't have time to break down. I had to survive. And that meant I needed money. Fast out I sat in the driver's seat of my car, parked outside a used dealership on the outskirts of town. The lot was small, lined with cheap sedans and old trucks, the kind of place desperate people went when they had no other options. And today I was one of them. I gripped the steering wheel, hesitating. Selling my car felt like admitting defeat. It was the last piece of my independence, my escape route if things got worse. But what choice did I have? I forced myself to move, stepping out and walking toward the office. A neon open sign flickered in the window. A man in his late 50s sat behind a cluttered desk, a coffee cup in one hand, flipping through paperwork with the other. He looked up as I walked in, his gaze immediately assessing. "You looking to buy or sell?" he asked. I squared my shoulders. "Sell." His expression didn't change. "Got the title?" I nodded, reaching into my purse. "Let's take a look then." I watched as the dealer circled my car, hands in his pockets, nodding to himself like he was making some grand assessment. "It's in good shape," he finally said. "New tires, clean interior." "What year is it?" 2018. He clicked his tongue. "Not bad. But you know how it is, market's tough. I can do 3,000. My stomach twisted. 3,000? This car is worth at least 10. He shrugged. "Maybe if you had time to wait for the right buyer. But you don't, do you?" I clenched my teeth. I hated this. I hated the smug way he looked at me, the way he knew I was out of options. But he wasn't wrong. I needed money now. And 3,000 was better than nothing. I swallowed my pride and nodded. "Fine." He grinned. "Smart choice." An hour later, I walked out of the dealership with the check in my hand. $3,000. It wasn't much, but it would buy me time. I got into a cab, staring out the window as we drove back to my mother's house. The town looked different now, smaller, colder, like I no longer belonged. As I didn't. I had built an entire life away from here. A life that no longer existed. And now I had to figure out what came next. When I walked through the front door, my mother was waiting. Her eyes flicked to the check in my hand. "You got the money?" I nodded, setting it on the counter. 3,000. That covers rent for 10 weeks. She arched an eyebrow. "And after that?" I stiffened. "I'll figure something out." She snorted. "Right. Because you've done such a great job of that so far." Anger flared in my chest. I didn't come here to be insulted. She leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "No, Vanessa. You came here because you ran out of men to manipulate." I flinched. "You spent years juggling 2 husbands, 2 homes, and now what?" She scoffed. "You lost everything. And you still don't know how to stand on your own 2 feet. I clenched my fists. "I don't need a lecture." "Then what do you need?" she challenged. "Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to hold your hand. You want to survive? Get a job." I stared at her, my pulse racing. A job. The idea felt foreign. Jacob had supported me for years. Daniel had helped fill in the gaps. I had never needed to work. But now? I swallowed hard. Maybe it was time. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mother was right. I couldn't rely on anyone else anymore. I had no home, no car, no savings. And if I didn't act fast, I'd have no future either. I reached for my phone, opening a job search site. Retail, waitressing, receptionist work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I exhaled slowly, clicking on a listing for a receptionist at a local gym. I had no choice. If I wanted to survive, I had to start over. No more safety nets. No more lies. Just me. And the wreckage of the life I had destroyed. The morning after I applied for the receptionist job, I woke up feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. Reality was setting in, harder and heavier than before. I had spent my entire adult life maintaining an illusion of control. Now I had none. My car was gone. My savings were gone. My relationships were beyond repair. And today, for the first time in over a decade, I had to walk into a job interview and beg for work like a nobody. I clenched my fists under the sheets. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be hosting Thanksgiving in a beautiful home, wrapped in the warmth of a life I had carefully built. Instead, I was waking up in my mother's spare bedroom, hoping a low-wage job at a gym would keep me from sleeping on the street. I forced myself to get up. Self-pity wouldn't save me now. The gym was smaller than I expected, just a single-floor establishment tucked between a laundromat and a fast food joint. It smelled like sweat and cheap air freshener, and the overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A muscular woman in her late 40s stood behind the front desk, typing something into a computer. She barely glanced up when I approached. "You here for a membership?" she asked. I cleared my throat. No. I applied for the receptionist position. That made her look up. She scanned me from head to toe, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Vanessa, right?" I nodded. She sighed, rubbing her temple. I was hoping someone younger would apply. My stomach clenched. "I can do the job. Have you ever worked in customer service before?" "Not in years. And definitely not in a place like this." "I can learn," I said quickly. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Why do you even want this job?" I swallowed, my throat dry. What was I supposed to say? That I had been caught cheating on my husband and thrown out of both my lives? That I was living with my mother and needed any source of income just to keep a roof over my head? That wasn't going to get me hired. So I did what I had always done best. I lied. "I just want to start fresh," I said, forcing a small smile. "I'm looking for stability." She watched me for a long moment, then let out a short sigh. "Fine. I'll give you a trial shift. See how you do." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you," I said quickly. "Don't thank me yet," she muttered. "It's minimum wage, and the members can be assholes." She grabbed a clipboard from the desk and handed it to me. "Be here tomorrow at 6 a.m. Don't be late." I nodded, clutching the clipboard like it was a lifeline. I had a job. It wasn't much, but it was something. When I walked through the front door that afternoon, my mother was waiting for me, arms crossed. "Well?" she asked. I placed the clipboard on the counter. "I got it." She scoffed. "What kind of job?" I hesitated. "Receptionist at a gym." Her lips curled into something between amusement and pity. "Huh. Never thought I'd see the day." I bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" She leaned against the counter. "You always thought you were too good for a job like that. Always wanted someone else to take care of you." I clenched my jaw. "I'm handling it, aren't I?" She smirked. "We'll see." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched. I hated that she was right. I had spent my life making sure I was wanted, needed, worshipped. And now I was nothing but a struggling woman with a job that barely paid above minimum wage. I had fallen hard. The next morning, I arrived at the gym 10 minutes early. The same woman from yesterday, her name was Linda, was already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee. She raised an eyebrow when she saw me. "You're early. That's a good sign." I forced a smile. "Just wanted to make a good impression." She snorted. "Don't bother. Half the people here won't even notice you exist." She motioned toward the computer. "All right, here's how this works. You check people in, answer the phone, and deal with complaints. If someone forgets their towel or loses their locker key, you handle it." I nodded, trying to absorb everything. "And most importantly," she continued, Don't get involved with any of the members. Gym hookups always end in disaster. I blinked. That won't be a problem. Linda gave me a look like she didn't believe me but didn't care enough to push. All right, she said, stepping back. Let's see if you can handle this place. By the end of my first shift, my feet ached, my head pounded, and I had officially lost all remaining dignity. I had been yelled at twice, once by a man whose keycard wouldn't scan and once by a woman furious that we were out of her favorite brand of protein bars. A man had openly flirted with me at the counter, and when I didn't flirt back he muttered, "Stuck up bitch." And to top it all off, I had spilled an entire smoothie on my shirt, while trying to clean up a mess someone else had left behind. I wanted to quit. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't, because this was all I had left. And as I wiped down the counter, my hands shaking from exhaustion, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't using charm or deception to survive. I was just working. For the first time, I wasn't the one in control. And I hated every second of it. By the end of my first week at the gym, the ache in my feet had become a constant throb, my patience had thinned to almost nothing, and I had discovered a new level of humiliation I hadn't thought possible. I was invisible. No one cared who I was. No one looked at me like I was special. To them, I was just the receptionist. And every time I had to smile through clenched teeth at a rude customer or mop up someone's spilled protein shake, I felt a bitter, gnawing rage clawing at the edges of my sanity. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had been admired, wanted, worshipped. Now I was being ignored, and it was killing me. "Hey, Vanessa." I turned from behind the counter to see Linda tossing a rag at me. I barely caught it before it hit me in the face. "Locker room needs cleaning," she said. "Someone puked near the showers." I stiffened. "That's not my job." She snorted. "It is today." I gritted my teeth, but I didn't argue. What was I going to do, quit? I had no savings, no backup plan, and my mother would throw me out the second I ran out of money. So I grabbed the cleaning supplies and made my way toward the locker room. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell hit me. I gagged. This was officially my lowest point. As I knelt on the tile floor, scrubbing away someone else's vomit, I thought about what Jacob and Daniel would say if they saw me now. Would they laugh? Would they pity me? I clenched my jaw. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I had survived losing everything. I could survive this. It wasn't until later that day, when I was back at the front desk, that my entire world tilted again. The door swung open and I barely glanced up, too exhausted to care. Then I heard his voice. "Didn't expect to see you here." My blood ran cold. I lifted my head slowly. Standing on the other side of the counter, in a perfectly tailored suit, looking annoyingly confident, was Jacob. My throat went dry. He looked good. Better than I remembered. His usual calm demeanor was still there, but now there was something else, something sharp, something that said I won. I swallowed hard. "What are you doing here?" He smirked. "I have a business meeting with the gym's owner. Apparently they're looking for investors." My stomach twisted. Of course he would walk into this gym. Of course he would see me like this. I was standing behind a front desk wearing a cheap polo shirt, my hair pulled into a rushed ponytail, while he stood there in a suit that probably cost more than my entire net worth. His eyes flicked to my name tag. "Receptionist, huh?" I forced a smile, ignoring the burning shame in my gut. "That's right." He let out a low chuckle. Well, looks like you finally learned what it's like to work for a living." I wanted to die. I wanted to crawl under the counter and disappear. But I couldn't. So I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and forced myself to own it. "Enjoy your meeting," I said, my voice level. "Let me know if you need anything." He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh, trust me. I don't need anything from you." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my entire body trembling. I barely made it through the rest of my shift. Jacob had seen me at my lowest, and he enjoyed it. I had seen it in his eyes, the satisfaction, the smug amusement. He wanted me to suffer. And the worst part? I couldn't blame him. Because if the roles were reversed, if I had been the one betrayed, I would have wanted the same thing. I sat in the break room after my shift, staring at my reflection in my phone screen. For the first time, I truly saw myself for what I was. A woman who had lost everything. A woman who had once juggled 2 lives, 2 men, 2 homes, only to end up here alone scrubbing gym floors and answering phones. Jacob had 1. Daniel had 1. And I had nothing. That night when I got home, my mother was waiting for me in the kitchen. She had a knowing look in her eyes. "You saw him, didn't you?" I didn't even bother asking how she knew. She always knew. I collapsed into the chair across from her, rubbing my temples. "He enjoyed it." "Of course he did," she said simply. "You humiliated him. Now he gets to watch you struggle." I exhaled shakily. "It won't always be like this." She arched an eyebrow. "And what are you going to do about it?" I stared at the table. I didn't know. For the first time in my life, I didn't have an answer. Because for the first time, I was powerless. And I didn't know how to fix it. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake, every decision that had led me here. I had once been the woman in control, the one who kept 2 men wrapped around her finger, who had built 2 perfect lives, carefully balanced like a house of cards. Now I was the one barely holding it together. Jacob had seen me humiliated, and I knew it wouldn't be the last time. He had money, power, and a future without me. Daniel had erased me from his life completely, taking my children with him. And here I was sleeping under my mother's roof, working for minimum wage at a job I hated, with no real plan, no real escape. I was stuck. For the first time in my life, I had nothing to offer anyone. And that scared me more than anything. I stared at my phone for a long time before finally pressing call. Daniel's number. I had tried for weeks. He hadn't answered once. I didn't expect him to answer now, but this time he did. His voice was cold. "Vanessa." I closed my eyes. "Daniel, please. Just hear me out. You have 10 seconds. My throat tightened. "I want to see the kids." Silence. Then a slow, bitter laugh. "No. Daniel, please," I whispered. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But they're still my children. You should have thought about that before you spent years lying to them," he snapped. "Before you let them believe you were someone you weren't." I squeezed my eyes shut. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," he corrected. "Over and over again. And I'm not going to let you come crawling back, just because you finally ran out of people to manipulate." Tears burned at my eyes. "I love them, Daniel." "Then do what's best for them," he said. "And stay the hell away." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my shaking hands. Daniel was gone. The kids were gone. It was over. I sat outside my mother's house, staring at the neighborhood I had once sworn I would never return to. I had been so sure that I would never need this place again, that I would never be this woman, broken, abandoned, forgotten. But here I was. I wasn't Vanessa, the confident wife. I wasn't Vanessa, the perfect mother. I wasn't Vanessa, the woman 2 men had fought over. I was just Vanessa, a woman who had made too many mistakes. A woman with no home, no future, and no idea where to go from here. And maybe that was exactly what I deserved. Days turned into weeks. The holidays came and went, but they didn't feel the same anymore. Jacob didn't reach out. Daniel didn't change his mind. I was well and truly alone. I kept my job at the gym, working long shifts just to keep my mind from spiraling. My mother barely spoke to me, and honestly, I didn't blame her. The new year arrived without celebration. And one night as I sat in bed, staring at my empty bank account, I finally accepted the truth. No one was coming to save me. Not Jacob. Not Daniel. Not even myself. Because I had already destroyed everything worth saving. And all that was left was nothing.